Upgrading your artillery Sidewinder X1 with an automated bed leveling sensor has never been easier than today. Why? Because for the first time we have this beautiful piece of firmware available that you can free of charge download from Thingiverse. It's provided by user Digent and it's based on the latest Marlin 2.091. You just simply download that piece of software, flash it to your printer. You don't have to compile anything by yourself. You don't have to be a Marlin expert. You don't have to solder around. No, you just install the software. Then you buy yourself a probe. May it be the original BLTouch for about $50 US, or may it be a clone like I've shown here in this video for about $20 US. Yeah, you mount that probe, install that software, and you reconnect two cables within the bottom of the printer, and then you're ready to go. The rest of the setup is just done very simple within the touch display menu. To mount that little touch probe, I reused an already existing extruder cover, which I remixed originally from Thingiverse and deployed a couple of changes for my needs. Reason being is that the original part cooling air fan was disturbing my view to the nozzle. I wanted to have a full undisturbed view to the nozzle while printing, so I moved that part cooling fan over to the right side, and that's the result here. The whole thing is to download from Thingiverse. That should look familiar to you. That's the original extruder from the artillery Sidewinder X1. And I'm going to show you what I changed here in my setup in order to mount that little bed leveling touch sensor. Okay, first of all, remove that cover. Now I'm going to pull out this fan connector here and remove that fan. Here we see this little LED light. This little LED light is going to be dismissed. We don't use it anymore. Instead, we are using and we need the existing wiring for this LED light. Okay, so in order to mount that probe and to get it connected, I'm following the so-called Wexter method. What's that? Wexter, that is a username on YouTube. And so as far as I know, Wexter was the first one who came up with this so-called Wexter method now. And he thought, okay, for this new probe that we want to install here on our printer, we certainly do need some wiring. And one way is, to add just some new wires, we need 4 of them to add them. And then you have to circle around and get those wires somewhere installed along the moving axis on your printer. And that's all not that easy. Maybe it doesn't look as professional. Okay, so the much easier way is we just dismiss this LED light, and those connectors here, formerly used for the LED, we now use to power this little bed leveling probe. Okay, and that's what we are going to do now. How to mount that little probe. Okay, that was a little bit of a challenge, but I came up and designed a little part that you see in gray here that will hold that probe. It's a kind of, let me first remove the screw here. You can keep the rest as it is of the circuit board here. Okay, Let's see. You see, this is like a little slider that sits there and it fits perfectly. That little slider you need to adjust the height later on for the probe. Okay, and it's so designed. Some of you may have seen this before. Just over half a year ago, at least, I designed this new cover for the air fan. You see, that's the original fan that sits right here. And as I said before, I didn't like it because I didn't have any view on the nozzle while printing. And that's very important for me, to watch the first layer, to see if the flow is right, if the adhesion is perfect, the temperature fits and everything, because every time I use different filaments, some parameter may change there. Okay, so I designed this little cover. This is, by the way, also free to download from Thingiverse. And I wanted to use this cover to mount and to integrate somehow that little probe there. And so that was the task for me. So you see, that's how it works. This little slider fits right beneath, and it sits perfectly within this cover. How to get that whole thing fixed? Okay, some of you may have downloaded and used this cover already. The good news is you don't need to reprint the whole cover. It's very easy. You just need to cut away 3 millimeters of height from that little pins here. And if you just cut them away, you know, the slider right fits in there, and you don't need to change anything more. And you can continue to use your already existing printed cover. Okay, so you may wonder here, okay, this is the original air fan, and you just remove that air duct below there. It's just glued on. The original fan here comes with a quite short power connection cable. Well, if you use this new mount here, it needs to be extended a little bit. Well, you can of course extend it by soldering, or you just do what I did here, and I just bought for $6 maybe, the same size fan, 24 volts, and that came originally with a longer connection cable. Well, that's easy to do, right? You don't need to do any soldering then. You just need to take care that the colors red and black are connected in the right order within the socket, because that changes somehow sometimes. Because if you screw it up and you have the wrong colors, so plus and minus are not correct, these little fans, they have a circuit board and some electronics built within, and if they have the wrong direction running, then it will burn up the new fan. Okay, back to the probe. All of them, the BLTouch or even the clones, they come with this kind of connector here, and you take care of the order here of the coloring, the wire coloring. It's brown for minus, it's red for plus, it's yellow, black and white. Okay, because if you buy one of these clones, for example, they may come with a complete different color, as you see here on my right side, and you see that is orange, but orange here is the minus color, so that screws completely. So take care just from left to right that you see this is minus, plus, and then the signals. Black is again minus, but we don't need it. Since it's black and brown is the same, they go together within the probe, so we don't need this black anymore. And it's just a dead end, as you will see. We just need 4 wires to install, to use for this probe. So next, let's take a look at this little connector board here, where the flat cable comes in and distributes all the electrical wiring to the extruder, sensors and heating devices. Okay, that sits here, as you see. At the other end of the wiring, all the clones or the original BLTouch, they come with those female so-called DuPont connectors. Okay, so how do we get them now fixed here on this circuit board? We see on the circuit board is a female, and on this wiring is also a female. So one solution could be, some of them probes, they come with this neat little pin connector. That's very easy to use. You just push it in, and so you have a wonderful connection. It's just an example here. So the color order is not correct as shown here in this video. I just wanted to show you how I push that pins here in at connectors. So that little connector here in this way came with 5 wiring pins, and you just can cut them away because we just need 4, but I left it on there since it has a little bit more adhesion then, it's stronger within, and it doesn't wobble so much around as if you would just have a single pin there to hold the whole piece. Okay, that's a little. I tried to find that in accessories somewhere online. I couldn't find it. So, well, if you have one, then you're lucky. If you don't, then you have to come up with another idea. And some of those probes, they come with new pins. So if you have a crimping device, then you can, of course, put on some new pins there, and that you can straight connect there. Because of this very slim design, you have to pay attention here to this little air fan socket. There's another socket here right behind the probe, and they both interfere, as we can see here, in this way. So one way to solve it, you just mount the probe 180 degrees turned, so that the socket from the probe faces right to you. Okay, it doesn't look that beautiful to me, so I didn't want to do it that way. I wanted to install the probe as it is, with the naming here up to the front, and hide everything else. Because of that, very simple solution is, but now really you have to solder a little bit. I removed that air fan socket and I extended it a little bit by just soldering just 2 cables, 2 wires, extended it a little bit, so it's very flexible now to move. And now you see everything fits perfectly together. The slider works and it should be fine. Let's take a look at the colors again, how to wire that probe. So that's the wiring here, that's the color code from the original BLTouch. I try to put them here together so that you see which wire has to go which way to the circuit board. You see here brown, red, yellow, black, white. That's how the wiring leaves the probe, and to the circuit board we see yellow, red, brown and white. That's the order you have to install here. May it be with the pin connector I just showed. What I did here is, because I didn't have more of these pin connectors, I needed it for some other project. So and it was also too long, that little cable. So I just decided that I cut that cable and I soldered it right into the circuit board. So then I could manage to have the right length. And in case I wanted to remove something later on, I mean, you still have this connector there on the probe to change that probe if there would be something, some defect or something. Okay, so that was my solution here. If you don't want to solder, I mean, you see here, this is another connection cable that I also tried. And what I did here is that came with changeable pins. So first of all, it was this little DuPont female pin that came originally with a probe, but it came also with some exchange pins. But in order to get them on there, you need to have a crimping device, and that way I could manage to get here some male DuPont pins on that right away fits into the female socket here. The original BLTouch, or even some of the clones, they come delivered with little springs to mount that sensor. Well, I just didn't want to waste that springs, so I used them here. And you see, the mounting is quite flexible here. I'm not sure whether it's really necessary. I don't think so, but it may be sometimes nice to have. We have done the mounting and the wiring of the bed level touch sensor. So we are done with the extruder work. Okay, let's take a look. You need to put your printer to the side. Open the bottom and see what we have inside. This is how the original printer looks inside. This is the main board. And let's pay attention here to this 3-wire brown connection cable and this black one, because now and next I'm going to show how it looks and afterwards and what we have to change. Again, this is the original as you will find it when you open your printer. Okay, and this is how it looks when you are done with the reconnecting. Okay, you see here, those two connectors are from the end stops. You just leave them as they are. You don't need to touch them. And now we take a look here. This is the connector with the 3 wires brown cable. And this was the first original and this is how it looks like when you are done. It's very easy to do. Just need to be a little bit of careful and concentrated which pins to use. You see here that are 1, 2, 3, 4 rows, each 3 pins. And we are using the far above row. So the first one looking from above. That one we use, and we put in here this 3-wire connector horizontally. Original, this one was on the right side, vertically connected. Okay, we put it exactly this way as you see here. Here you see an example, a picture, because this little metallic silver looking connectors there, they have to point downwards. Okay, and this is the right direction to put in the connector with the 3 brown wires. So the next is here this little black cable, and this signal cable for the end stop you just connect here within the green field, and you also use the far above connector pin. Because this is a DuPont connector, it has some black plastic cover around. I suggest you just remove this cover. In that case, it's easier to push that connector down to the pin, and it has a little bit more grip there. We are done here changing the connectors, but since we have this bottom of the printer already open up, it's a good idea now to continue with the new firmware, to flash the new firmware from Digent to the board. And because therefore you need to disconnect the TFT connection cable. There was one signal cable from the TFT touch display here to the board, and that cable needs to be disconnected while flashing the new firmware. You find other instructions on how to do it, and also on the Thingiverse use a Digent page. Everything is explained there in English. Having Thingiverse opened, user Digent, I'm looking for this file here. Artillery Sidewinder X1 Marlin firmware 2.091 for BLTouch, following the Wexter method, and it's using the Z-Max connector. That's exactly what we wired so far, and we need that file for the main board, and we need to download that other file here. That's the new firmware for the touch display, TFT. Okay, those two files you download, you extract them from the zip, and you continue to install the firmware. How to do it, as I said, Digent explains it here in English, and you just follow the instructions there. The new firmware is flashed to the main board, so you have the latest Marlin on your printer, and you also flashed the TFT touch display using a small SD card to get that latest firmware on there for having the menu that integrates the bed sensor. Okay, and now we continue mechanically. First of all, adjusting the height, the mounting height from the BLTouch sensor here. To do so, I protect my bed with a folded copy paper, because I will heat the nozzle in order to clean off any blobs that there might be. So by hand I move down the nozzle and clean the nozzle until it tightly fits here. Okay, that's done. That's okay. This is all real time here. What I then need, I need something 4 millimeter of height. I mean, you could also just use 3 millimeter. That's all within the parameters of this probe. So why do I use 4 millimeter instead of 3, as often shown in other videos? Yeah, I wanted to mount that little probe pin here as high as possible, because as you see here, I'm using bed clamps at some times, depending on what kind of bed surface I decide to use. Whenever the little probe needle is retracted, I just want to make sure and avoid that this little needle there never collides with any of these bad clamps. And now it's so easy just to slide down the bed level sensor with its retracted probe pin until it rests on my 4mm tool. So now it's time to test our sensor for the first time by powering on the printer. The needle will retract twice, and if everything is okay, there is a little red inbuilt light that will stay on. So what do we do with this little Z end stop here? Yeah, we don't use it anymore, so don't use it anymore. Remove it, and I just made sure that it doesn't collide with any of the other moving parts here from the Z-axis. So we are almost done, so let's finalize the whole setup within the menu itself. Of course, the nozzle position and the little probe tip position, well, is not the same, of course, depending on where we positioned our sensor. Okay, but Marlin needs to know that shifting, because Marlin is calculating while probing the bed, it is using the bed probing sensor, but in real print, Marlin uses exactly that kind of position to print, so that the printing position and the measuring probing position will be eventually the same. Okay, so that's what we need to do now. We need to tell Marlin how much the coordinates differ from each other. So, and for that, we just go into the menu and open up the settings there. So as you know, for the X and Y homing, the nozzle is positioned on the front left corner of the bed. So that's our 0 coordinate for X and Y. Now I'm going to measure in millimeter the distance in X and Y direction, the distance from the probe tip to the nozzle. Okay, within the menu, going to parameters and then scrolling down a little bit. This is all in German. Of course, you will have this in English language. Okay, and right above Linear Advanced, we have here the sensor settings. In X, Y, and Z. Z is not interesting for us. That's the next step we do. We just take care of X and Y. So what's the difference? What's the distance from the nozzle to the bed leveling sensor tip? And in X direction, my tip from the probe is 20 millimeters more to the right side. So that would be a positive. That's why this is a positive 20 millimeters. And in Y direction, the probe tip is 15 millimeters up front, so towards me sitting in front of the printer, and that's why it would be a negative Y. So that's minus 15 millimeters. Okay, so here I put in the 20 millimeters. That's okay, and it is as easy as that. You see, you just point in, and then you can change that number there, depending on where you mounted that little probe. When you're done with the right X and Y, it's always a good idea to go back and scroll down further a little bit, and here you will find Save to EEPROM, and that's what you're going to do. So save everything you changed so far to the EEPROM. So then it is permanently stored there. That's what we need to have. We are done with the X and Y positioning. Telling Marlin what's the difference between the nozzle coordinates and the tip coordinates. So at next we need to take care of the Z positioning. First of all, because we are using our paper soon again, I wanted to heat up the nozzle to at least 200 degrees in case we do have a little filament blob here right underneath the nozzle, so we want to clean up the whole thing. Pressing menu, movements, we go to the bed leveling, and now you look that little pictogram that looks like the probe tip, and that's the Z offset. So, and now we can start the whole process. We are doing so by pressing here on that little picture, and now we see the printer is moving. X and Y is homing, and also the Z axis is homing. Okay, so we see that the probe is working. And the probe now is testing itself. Because you know there is this little trigger point within the probe itself. And this little trigger point, that's the magic. You cannot see it from the outside. I mean, the needle is either retracted, I mean fully, completely in, or completely out. That's mechanically. But in the first third around, there is this little trigger point, this electronic trigger point, and we need the printer now to find out that little trigger point. That's very comfortable for us. The printer found his trigger point by himself and is waiting for us now to correct the nozzle height according to that. And for that, we must use a folded copy paper. So that's about the height here from 0.2 millimeter. So you see the firmware is awaiting us with a shim of 0.2 millimeters, and that's the folded paper thickness. And let's just take it that way. The beauty is that it will calculate even the shim within all the settings, so that we don't have to really think anymore about it. Right now I slide the folded copy paper underneath the nozzle tip, between the nozzle and the bed. We even have the option here, you see, to change the height presettings. I mean, pressing the buttons up and down once, I mean, you can tell the printer here move either 0.01 millimeter, which I suggest, or move by each pressing 0.1 millimeter. Everything else is too much and doesn't make any sense for me. Using one hand to slide the folded paper and step by step pressing up or downwards until the paper is smooth and soft between that nozzle and the bed surface. With a little bit of resistance, the nozzle is still heated at least to 200 degrees so that we don't have any blob underneath the nozzle that is disturbing us here. And if everything is smooth and fine and you feel that little bit of resistance, then you are done. You're almost done. We still have to save the whole result. We press that little button and the menu circles itself here. Saving, loosen the motors, stepper motors, and so on. You see, that's going like a circle. And here's save. We press save and save to the EEPROM. Yes, that's what we do. Okay, now we have saved the trigger point and the whole Z offset permanently to the Marlin. That's why I like this software so much, because it makes it so easy for us to go through all the process. You see, we use that shim 0.2 millimeter folded paper, and that shim is subtracted here already, so we don't need to take care of anything anymore, and everything should work afterwards. So going back, and so the printer is homing itself once again, and you see, and now the probe is probing the bed in Z. Perfect. And did you see the little light there from the bed leveling sensor? That just switched on green before it was red, while the process was continuing, and now everything is done, everything is ready, bed leveling is on. Remember, we have done the mechanical setup, 4 millimeters of height by using the slider from the bed leveling sensor mount. We have done the X and Y and Z offset. And what we do finally is probing the whole bed. That you follow that little pictures here that I use for that. And I just pressed start, and now the whole bed is tested. The probe will start right in the middle, and because if you set that offset in X and Y the correct way, you will find yourself that the probe will begin right in the center from the bed. Now it takes a couple of minutes because the probe will go through a certain pattern around the center point and will check your bed. And something personal at last. Yes, you guessed it already. I'm not a native English speaker, and yes, I did the original video complete in German and tried my best to synchronize it here into English. Why? Because I have had some English comments and questions on my published German videos, so that I thought, well, there might be an English-speaking interest out there. Since this is my premiere with an English-speaking video, please be very welcome to leave comments and suggestions, and depending on that, I will decide for future videos whether I do them bilingual. That might be a way, or opening up a second channel to do just some English-speaking videos only. Meanwhile, the probing has finished, and we receive the following message: probing has finished, the unified bed leveling. Please save that, and we press yes. We can go back. One thing I'd like to do now is to check the mesh bed. Isn't that interesting? Here you see all the measurement points, and you see the deviation from each point to the next point. So you can see how flat your bed actually was. That was just probed here. Okay, well, that's just for information. Well, even you could edit manually here different heights. Well, I don't believe that you want to do that. I didn't want to do that either, but I'm going to save it here to the EEPROM again. Here you have even a functionality to save up for different bed surfaces. Well, I didn't test it, I don't use it. It's so easy to probe it again, so no need for me to save different bed level surfaces here. So that's why I just return here, and to return from here I just press that little green Häkchen in German. And now we are back, and finally just activate that bed leveling here. Red means it's not working, and green, of course, it's on. Okay. The printer is powered on, and now let's see how it is printing using that new function, automatic bed leveling, with that new upgraded bed leveling sensor. USB stick is inserted. You also see that new function model preview right within the menu display here. Well, you have to upgrade to that Digent firmware here from the TFT, and you have to save your printing files within Cura using a Cura plugin. And the print is starting. X and Y are homing, and for the Z, the probe will check the bed level. Move to the print beginning. At first the purge line is printed. As you see, I moved my purge line about 20 millimeters more to the right side so that I avoid any collisions with my bed clamps that I use sometimes when experimenting on different bed surfaces, and so the nozzle wouldn't run into those clamps. Please leave your comments and suggestions. Bye bye.